We think about pain, when we think about a struggle, this would be a personal or um, it can be global. But today we're going to talk really about like the details on a personal level of our relationship with a struggle in general. Um, and what are some of the components that formulate the way we relate to pain? So, the first thing to notice is that for a lot of us, we live in our head more than we live in our body. There is a space where we are not using our sensations. So we have more than just words. We have ears, we have eyes, we have a nose, right? So we have smell, we have hearing, seeing. And a lot of times when we are looking at something, we refrain from using our intuition, from using all our senses to create an independent thinker, right? So to make your own judgment call. And sometimes you'll see red flags and things, but we will push that aside because somebody is telling us something. And for a lot of us, there is, especially in the Western culture, there's if you have money, you will be happy. If you will be skinny, you will be happy. If you have a lot of friends, you'll be happy. There are certain conclusions that a lot of us have bought into that surpass the real sense of happiness. And we think if I just get there, if I'm just in those spaces, if I just have those things that I feel I need and want, I will be happy. But that's not how it works. Because happy is a being happy in that happiness, which is a counter really to pain, is when we include all our senses. Where pain fits into this is where pain feels torturous is when we are actually feeling, right? So it's when somebody's in pain or they're feeling pain, they're feeling all their senses are heightened and they're in their body. A lot of times when pain shows up, it shows up in the form of sensation, but it shows up when there has been neglect in certain areas. And when we think about balance in life, there are 5 things that are really important to consistently commit to in your daily routine that create balance. And that is eating, sleeping, movement, prayer, and nurturing, right? So when we have those things consistently on a daily basis, there's an element of feeling good that is available to us. Now, what happens is when somebody is struggling, one of the first things they tell you they can't do is, I can't eat, I can't sleep. One of the first things that happen is the basics get eliminated. Now, without having that core base, it's difficult for the body to get that fifth one, which is the nurturing, right? So having the 4 creates the space where we can be nurtured. And how this works is I've shared this before, but we'll just use this as a reminder. In Shabbos davening, right? We say, Kad shenu b'mitzvosecha, v'sein chalkenu b'tzorasecha, savenu mituvecha, v'samach nafshenu b'yeshuasecha, and then v'tar libenu li'avdecha v'emes. And that's a really, really beautiful tefillah because to having the nurturing in itself, there's a formula. Kad shenu b'mitzvasecha, the kad shenu, it has the lashon of kad, which is a vessel. So the formula to happiness is there first has to be a vessel to be open to the nurturing, right? And then we have to, and then it's clearing the space. So it's saying chalkenu. The chelek is like it's a space. It's we're asking for space. So you have the vessel, and then you have the space within the vessel, and then we put in the tefillah of sein chalkenu b'sar. Then it says savenu mituvecha. So when you have that space, that open space, then you could be articulate with the kind of thing that comes in. To feel fulfilled, there has to be this openness. So the vessel, the openness, and then that the bracha can come in. So savenu is that satisfaction. And only then it says v'taher libenu liyavdecha b'yemes. The tahara, the kedusha and the tahara that comes in, that purity comes in that kind of format. But what's really, really important is to always know that it's that positioning. Like I spoke in the last recording, there has to be this opening to begin with. So the thing is that when our basics aren't met and we are living in our head rather than connecting with the body and just being present in this space, we're always then looking for what we need in the terms of a goal rather than an experience. So it's like if somebody says to me, I'm missing nurturing in my life, I need nurturing, and they're so busy with a very specific kind of nurturing. Like, let's say they would say, I need a vacation, right? So they're so adamant about having a vacation that they don't stop to ask themselves why. They're like, I need a break. Okay, so break that down. Okay, if you need a break, what is that? And at the end of the day, it always boils down to connecting with yourself, right? Having that time to connect, to have the peace of mind, and to find that menuchas hanefesh. But people don't realize that in our day-to-day life, we will interrupt the nurturing. There's so many avenues of feeling nurtured in our day, but we kind of tantrum and we neglect to notice that the nurturing comes in the little things. When people struggle in life in general, they're thinking that the solutions are big solutions. That's why it's so easy to bait them with these massive retreats and these great speakers that will teach you about giant transformation because it's tempting. And a lot of that creates appetite rather than creates a sustainability and wholeness within. But when we understand that that grounding comes in the sense of simplicity, right? It comes in the sense of simplicity, which is when your basics are met and you really commit to the basics, you have a higher chance of finding that fulfillment and that wholeness in your life. And then there will be less pain triggers, which we'll get to in a minute. But it sounds boring. It sounds boring. And people are like, that's it? All I need to do is sleep, eat, pray, move? Like, that's it? It's so boring. But Paul Chek calls it the four doctors, right? There's four doctors. And in life, things are a lot simpler than we think. But the thing is when we start creating appetite, when there's more of a complexity, we will neglect the basics, and then the signals that our body will send us, for example, the concept of pain, will be triggered on a much higher level because what we're doing is we're neglecting ourselves, right? So when there's pain, like if we are consistent, right? And we're consistent with listening to our body signals and including ourselves in the process. And people ask me, like, what does that look like? And that means it's as simple as standing on 2 feet, just noticing when you are standing or you're sitting, just tapping into your body rather than being in your head. Notice the sensations. You can do a body scan where you kind of just check in with your body itself, like just the shoulders, the chest, the hips, the organs, the knees, right? Rather than waiting for your body to say, like, oh my gosh, my knee is in pain, right? And if we have difficulty with connecting on that level, it's important to find silence. So, like finding a quiet space to allow the thoughts to filter out first and just breathe through it as they move through it, as your body cycles, until you find that connection with yourself. And this comes with time and practice. Another way to do this on a day-to-day level is you can stand against a wall. Take a moment to stand against a wall, and the wall will give you that awareness. It will give your body the awareness, just like in a chair. If you're having difficulty connecting with yourself in a chair, just sit and just notice your back at the back of the chair. Notice that you're supported sitting on the chair itself, on the base of the chair. And then just allow the muscles to begin to relax. And then whatever needs to move through you will move through you, however it needs to. So when it comes to basic nurturing, for a lot of us, I wrote that poem of like, don't interrupt me from loving you. We take that time in general to interrupt somebody from loving us if it's not exactly the way we want to be loved. For a lot of us, we have this idea in our head of what love or nurturing might look like, not realizing that the people in our life can only love us the way they can, right? Not the way we want to be loved, but the way they can. And there are beautiful things that we can learn from the way they express themselves. But when we interrupt somebody from their own flow, from their own expression, from their own way of nurturing, it's really difficult to get a wholesome experience when we have an illusion of what an experience is supposed to look like. How a parent, for example, or our partner, right? Or even a friend. Like, what is a friend supposed to be? But when we have these like lists and high expectations, or we're comparing it to what somebody else might have, what we're doing is we're trying to live somebody else's life rather than our own. But when we surrender to, when I say in interior design, I start with space. And the concept of space is what Hashem, right? The architect creates your space. The architect designs the space itself. Hashem decided what those dimensions are within the space that we live in. And that is the family we're born into, the mazel we have, right? The luck, the bracha that comes into our life, the way we will look, our health conditions. And all those things are there as tools. And if we don't see them as tools, a lot of times we will relate to them as working against us. Especially as like being a minority, being minorities in general, we can look at that as a disadvantage. And we can start feeling sorry for ourselves and saying, what's the point of this? Or if somebody has a health condition and they could be like, what's the point of this? But when we surrender, where the Amunah and Bitachon comes in is that we tell ourselves that if Hashem gave us whatever that scenario is, that's the place he wants us to serve him from. The suffering, right? There's pain and then there's suffering. The suffering isn't as intense. A great example I gave somebody this week was to try to throw out the ideal idea, let's say, of family, right? A lot of people have this, illusion of what the perfect family might look like. Um, but if we kind of step out of that space and we say we are just going to look at the beauty that every single person in our space brings to the table. And again, we're talking about natural conditions. We're not talking about anything unsafe or toxic. We're talking from just personality nuances. Um, when we allow people to be who they are rather than what we need them to be, it gives us the permission to also be who we need to be. And from an interior design perspective, what ends up happening is we end up communicating an honest self. So it goes back to that concept of designing a room, right? If you design a living room and you put couches in there and a coffee table, people know that they can bring coffee and a magazine and chill on a couch, and that is a living space. But if we create a living space and people walk in reading that, and then you yell and say, "This is not for anyone to sit on," we are giving mixed messages. The way we present ourselves, a lot of times, what we need isn't clearly communicated in the way we conduct ourselves or present ourselves. Um, from the fear of acceptance, of wanting to be accepted, we will present ourselves a certain way or present our scenario or situation a certain way to of fear of rejection or um, the need of acceptance rather than focus on what our needs are and be honest with ourselves. When we are more clear with those dynamics, what ends up happening is, and we're much more comfortable within ourselves, we give others a clearer understanding of where we're coming from, and what our needs are. A good design doesn't need to be explained, it's self explanatory. And that really also is part of this. So just noticing some of that stuff. So then that is kind of for a lot of the extra pain that shows up. A lot of times there's that extra suffering that shows up is the individual in itself not wanting to surrender to the dynamic um, of who we are, and we want to change that. We want the design to change. Um, but as soon as we start to accept the beauty in the individuality and know that there's a creator and he's created this beautiful, beautiful human being, and that is you, and knowing that every single thing there is perfect. If we approach that from love rather than from a place of pain or judgment, we can, number one, infuse love into ourselves and then infuse love into somebody else, and into all the people around us. But we can also then, the glasses change, where even if we're like, oh, I'm just critical of myself, I'm not critical of others. I hear people say that a lot of times. They're like, oh, I don't have confidence in myself. And I say that sometimes too. But the more we practice loving ourselves and being able to even accept the compliment or have that compassion for ourselves, the glasses change. We can start seeing others from a much more positive light. So just notice how that kind of works from the side of like the pain itself. So um, one of the things I've shared before is when pain and suffering works like two sides of like skin, right? So you have the external and the internal. So if somebody, let's say, would get a burn, it would feel a little different on the outside than it would on the inside. And there's like the, let's say, from a pressure aspect, there's the pushing from there's the sensation of, or the, right, so like the tension that happens from like pushing from the outside, and then what is happening on the inside. So there's an interaction from the inside and the outside of the skin. Pain and suffering kind of works the same way. Some situations in life that show up are very, very painful. Um, and some stuff we have a solution for, and some stuff we don't. And I can only share from experience. What I've noticed that we can put in Ishtadlus, but in certain areas we can't guilt ourselves if we don't have a solution. We can have compassion for the situation and for ourselves, and we can daven for a solution. So we can put in prayer and ask Hashem that at the right time He should send us a solution. Um, but until we have that solution, we don't have to create more pain and discomfort. And that's the key element, that we don't have to guilt ourselves for not having, like even with a self-care journey. Sometimes even for myself, I was like, I wish I had the information that I have now when I was 20. That would have been so helpful even as a teenager. But Hashem didn't want me to have that then. So I didn't have that then. He wanted me to serve him in a different way in that time. So obviously there's the Hishtadlus perspective, but every single, like I said before, every single one of us are brought into a different dynamic, and there is a very specific reason we're in that space and in that dynamic itself. So we can guilt ourselves and say, I wish I had the tools, but not find a way to punish yourself for not having the things you need, if there is something you need. And if there is something that you need and you're not finding the tools, you don't have to do it in an aggressive way or make everyone in your life uncomfortable, which I am also totally guilty of. Instead of, when you're feeling that discomfort, you can know that it is your discomfort. Obviously, find the right person to talk to. But when we daven, we can be very articulate in saying, and the discomfort that we feel, we can say, Hashem, this is really, really uncomfortable. I need a solution to this. Help me figure it out. But also being aware that the solution might not be exactly what we think it might be. Like I had a situation a couple weeks ago where something had to be solved, and turned out there was just an error. And I was so busy trying to solve it, and it was just an error. And it kind of just, there was an update in the system. They called me and they're like, oh, it was just a mishap. In the sense that when we pay attention to, and this works like allowing people in our lives to love us, instead of being so focused on the way we think it might be solved or the way that we need the nurturing, it's being open. So communicating what we need, but then being open to the way the other person or Hashem communicates with us and the way we receive it. So I hope that's helpful. And thank you so much for joining me in this experience today. Have a beautiful Shabbos. I'll take questions now if anyone has.